We'll get through it because of the people that are out there, the sons and the fathers of these wonderful guys.
Commissioner, your voice caught when you had to talk about the fact that you thought you'd never see a day like this with a very recent high ranking.
I just don't know how to explain it. Like I said, these are not just employees of a commissioner who arrived from IBM to try to manage a department. This is the voice of a commissioner who loves these guys at every level and who works with them, has worked with all of them at every level, from the union's perspective, fighting with them in the union and now fighting with them in management. Seems like I've been fighting with these guys for 15 years and I love them. I absolutely love them. These people, the three today, the fact that we couldn't go to Father Judge's funeral has got the mayor and I all twisted, but we couldn't. Just fortunately, there was a press service for him last night, and we were able to pay our respects to him and to all the other Franciscan friars that have been so wonderful to our department.
All right, the mayor's comments and the fire commissioner's comments coming there as they attend the funeral of New York Fire Chief Peter Gandy. We are going to take a brief respite from our discussions here and listening to the voices of America on this tragedy as we go to Aaron Brown in New York for an update on what's going on. And we will return here in just a few minutes and continue on. Aaron?
Bobby, thanks. And just watching the mayor, I think New Yorkers know this. I don't know if people outside the country do. It's actually been a very tough year for the mayor. He's battled prostate cancer this year. He's also been involved in a very messy public divorce, and that would be uncomfortable wherever you were, but in New York, where the two tabloids battle over such things and who can come up with the most detail on such matters, it's made it especially difficult. It has tended to diminish in some sense, I think, how people have viewed the mayor, but I doubt there are many people in this city, even people who have a fair amount of difficulty with Mayor Giuliani, who would not say that he has looked anything but diminished in this week. He has been all over town, all over the area, accessible always, and generally getting very high marks for his handling of the crisis of his administration, which is coming to an end. Tuesday was election day here, in fact, to begin the process of selecting his replacement. Perhaps this has been mentioned, I'm not sure, but it's the first time I've seen it, so let me pass it along. The president will meet at some point on, well, I was going to say Monday. Now I'm not sure it's Monday, but in any case, there's a plan for the president to meet with the executives of the nation's airlines. Nation's airlines were having a very difficult time before this, in fact. Obviously, this has been a devastating week for them, and the prospects moving ahead aren't very good either, and there's a lot of concern about their financial stability. Continental's talking about laying off 12,000 people and cutting its flights back, once it even gets to whatever normal is going to be, cutting its regularly scheduled flights back by 20%. Northwest Airlines saying much the same thing. Other airlines are having trouble. The House last night began work on a bill that would make direct cash payments of about a little more than $2 billion to the airlines, plus another $12 billion in loan guarantees. The Transportation Secretary is saying that they're quite concerned about the financial stability of the nation's airlines. It's a hugely important industry, and while Wall Street will get back to business as normal Monday morning, and in fact they are testing the systems and they are getting encouraging news that the electronics, the telecommunications and the like down on Wall Street is working fine, so that business will get back to normal, or whatever normal is now, on Monday. It's going to be a long time before the airline industry gets back to anything approaching normal, and that is just one, but it is a very serious economic impact issue. This thing is not simply about the damage done that's going to be extraordinarily expensive to rebuild and the rest, but you have going forward serious economic questions that need to be addressed, and none of them is going to be cheap. And the mere notion that Congress is talking about a $2+ billion direct payment to the nation's airlines, that is cash to them to keep them going, gives you some idea of how serious that situation is being seen, certainly by the representatives of the airlines who are working the halls of Congress to try and get some help. The administration has taken no position on that yet. Martin Savage, down on the streets of New York where the recovery operation goes on. Marty?
Aaron, obviously we've been focusing on the rescue effort, we've been focusing on the victims, and they are first and foremost both those topics in the minds of everyone. But I wanted to show you some other people who are victims here as well. If you look off on the corner that is just underneath the sign advertising about roses, that group of people, there have been people lining up there all day long. These are people that are local residents, people that live inside the exclusion zone immediately in the area surrounding what used to be the World Trade Center. And there are people that no longer have a home. Their homes still exist, their apartments still exist, but they cannot live in it. They have all been evacuated. And what they're waiting for is that they will be given the opportunity to be escorted to their apartment. And under escort, they have 10 minutes. 10 minutes to grab whatever it is they think they need, whatever they believe they need to carry on. And that's it. Then they leave. You see many of them coming down the street with whatever belongings that they could grab in that short amount of time. And all day long, people have been coming and going, doing that. It's likely that they will be out of their apartments for quite some time. And joining me to talk more on that subject and others is Michael Beeman. He is with FEMA here in New York, in the New York region. And that is, of course, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Michael, thank you for being with us.
No problem.
And let's talk about these people who have been displaced. There is assistance that can be available to them.
They very easily could be eligible for federal assistance, for rental assistance. If they've been displaced from the apartments down here because of this disaster, they are eligible for federal assistance for that. There's a lot of categories people are eligible for, such as medical assistance, funeral assistance, the rental assistance that we talked about. And there are a lot of other categories. They simply need to call a 1-800 number that we've been putting out. It's 1-800-462-9029. And once they call there, it's a seamless process. They provide the information, they're given a case number. From that era on, it's tracked by that case number as to what their eligibility will be. And then they'll start receiving funds from the federal government.
How quickly, though, will they get the money?
Actually, in some of our disasters in the past, we've been able to get checks out as quickly as 3 days after we've started taking in the information. It depends on the category of assistance that they're applying for.
And that number once more, just so
Is
people can...
1-800-462-9029.
Let's talk about something else. We have spoken a great deal about communications that people had through their cellular telephones, many people who were inside the building.
Right.
Now, through technology, it's sort of, you're trying to work it in reverse, in that you are trying not necessarily to communicate with the individual, but to their cell phone. Tell us how that is working.
Lucent Technologies came forward to us sometime in the last day or two and said, we have the technology to be able, if you can get us the numbers and send a signal to them, we'll be able to go ahead and figure out where those cell phones or pagers are. So we were asking anybody that knows of anyone that's missing and they have a cell phone number or a pager number for them, or some other communication device. Some pilots, I understand, are able to have communication devices, is that they call to that number and they give us those numbers that they know of so that we can have that signal sent to it. So Lucent give us some idea where we should be looking for those people that are still missing. That number is 877-348-8579. And we really appreciate that you all are getting it out nationally, because these numbers could be anywhere in the country that somebody knows of somebody that's missing and has a cell phone or a pager that they're used to calling. So we'd appreciate getting as much of this word out across the country.
Give us another idea of some of the other things that FEMA is directly involved in here.
Well, since FEMA is the agency responsible, it has the kind of the orchestration of all the other federal agencies of drawing in whatever resources there. I know that Health and Human Services is deeply involved. They have the disaster mortuary affairs teams in here. They also have the disaster medical assistance teams in here. The Coast Guard is deeply involved right now because, of course, they're only allowing so many ships into the ports about an hour and a half apart before the ships come in. They make sure all the paperwork's in line. But there are a never-ending list of federal agencies that are directly involved in this operation and trying to help this community recover from it.
Michael Beeman, we know that we will be hearing from FEMA and probably from you over the next days and weeks. Thank you very much. We wish your organization
Thank you
good
very
luck.
much. Appreciate it.
You might have heard the applause there, and you might think it's a bit out of place, so close to the proximity of the World Trade Center here. But actually, this being a Saturday afternoon, many people have been drawn down to this particular point. And each time that they see firefighters and rescuers coming out, every one of them they treat to a round of applause. Gives you the sense of the feeling here on the streets, even as close as we are to what used to be the World Trade Center. Aaron?
Marty, thanks. My eye is drawn behind you to that. I'm sure you know what I'm looking at. That string of American flags that line the street behind you. Has that been there for the last couple of days, or is that new today?
Flags have been appearing down here recently. Within the past number of days, it's been growing. Not just flags that are on buildings, flags that are on people. We were over on the West Side Highway there. There was a gentleman there that bought a huge bolt of cloth with the American flag emblazoned all over it. And what he was doing was cutting out little flags and handing it to each of the firefighters and police officers and pinning it onto the backs of them so that as they go in to do their job, that the American flag would be with them and be worn proudly.
Just as you were saying that, Verizon is a phone company here. A truck went by with a flag on it. We were coming in. We saw cabs with flags, cars on the highway with flags. Thank you, Marty. Martin Savage down on the ground there. One quick note, and I want to go to the Pentagon. I came across this a moment ago. Just a sense of how jittery things are in the country. A man was taken off a Delta Airlines flight, Boston, that would be Boston Logan, and you see the significance there, to Atlanta for what's described as suspicious and rowdy behavior. The man was, quote, vaguely Arab looking, end quote. I don't have a clue what that means, to be honest, and kept changing seats in first class. It's very jittery there. It's very jittery, period. We saw a little bit ago, about an hour or so ago, some new pictures of the Pentagon and the damage that was done there. We want to show you those again and talk some about the effort to put the Pentagon back together. Our Pentagon correspondent, Jamie McIntyre, joins us now. Jamie, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Aaron. Well, Pentagon officials today, specifically the manager of the Pentagon renovation project, because as you know, the Pentagon is undergoing a 10-year renovation, vowed to rebuild the Pentagon as good as new, perhaps even better than new, even replicating the historic limestone facade of the Pentagon. Was built during World War II, originally built in 16 months as part of the build-up to World War II. The Pentagon now has let the first contract, $145 million, to a local Virginia firm to put it back together. As they went through and showed us some of the pictures inside the building, they noted that in the new section, the blast-resistant windows did not shatter, even the ones right near where the plane went in, while in the old section of the Pentagon that had not yet been renovated, some of those windows had broken. And people I talked to here who were in the offices with those new shatter-resistant windows said they thought they saved their lives. There was also a sprinkler system and many other modern features in the renovated part of the building. The Pentagon officials here say this building has not been up to code since 1953. That was the last time it met all the fire and electrical codes, and they're going to change that now as part of the renovation. This is, of course, the world's largest government office building. They're going to have to remove approximately 350 million pounds of debris, and they're going to have to demolish the Pentagon down to the concrete columns and floor slabs, and then rebuild a space that's equivalent to more than 2 Empire State Buildings as part of this renovation. It's going to take years, but they say they will do it as quickly as possible and get people back into that building, which they say will be better than new. Aaron?
It's a building, Jamie, you go to work in every day. We were talking, I think it was yesterday afternoon, about the fact that for all of the power of television, television doesn't necessarily do these sorts of things justice, that when you see it firsthand up close in person, not on a 26-inch screen, it is much worse, almost said much more impressive, much worse than ever. Is that your impression as you look at it there?
You know, I was reviewing some of this video that they released today, and sometimes it's the smallest things that really touch you. One of the shots showed a desk with a computer. You could see a bowl of overturned fruit and candy, a pair of eyeglasses on the desk, an Army coin that all survived the blast, right where somebody had died. And when you see that, it really brings home that these were people working at these desks at the time this event happened. And it really does bring home the magnitude of what has happened here. There's the shot, one of the shots I was talking about on the air now, the eyeglasses there on the desk.
And the suddenness of it all.
Exactly. There you see the overturned bowl, and It's also incredible, though, when you think about it, how low the death toll was, considering that in this wedge of the building, this side of the building, nearly 10,000 people work, 5,000 and 10,000 work in this area. But because this was a part that was under renovation and some people were moving, and because of simply the sturdiness of the building, 189 people died, a tragic number, but it could have been worse if not for the fortress quality of the way this building was built back during World War II. And you know, at the time, they didn't have much steel because steel was needed for the war effort, so they had to use a lot of concrete to make this building strong enough to withstand. And originally, they didn't think the Pentagon was going to be used after World War II. They thought it would probably become a storage facility, so they made the specifications strong enough that it could hold thousands of pounds of records, and you know how heavy those can be. So the Pentagon is very solidly built. They say when they rebuild it, they'll be putting more steel in to reinforce it. It'll be even stronger.
And just to briefly underscore something, and 189 is a lot of people, and in no sense is this intended to minimize that, but that includes the 44 people, I think, is the right number.
People.
60 on the
64
airplane.
people.
Yeah, who were on the airplane. So actually, the death toll from people who were actually working at the Pentagon
Was 125.
And that's particularly, that number is especially low when you consider some of the earlier reports. Jamie, as we go along, we need to begin, I think, I do at least, focusing more on how, not the building, but the people inside the building, what they're doing, and what plans may be in play. And as we go along this afternoon and tonight, I suspect we'll be heading in that direction. Thanks for your work today. No one believes, by the way, that there are any more survivors in the rubble of the Pentagon. That number now is a pretty firm number. Not the case here in New York, where it's still unclear if any of the 5,000 or so people who are listed as missing may still be alive, which is why people continue to come to the Armory in New York to bring information about their missing loved ones. Elizabeth Cohen remains on duty there. Elizabeth.
Aaron, exactly. That's why they come to the Armory, and today they have a new reason to come to the Armory. The officials inside are taking DNA swabs. They're swabbing the inside of blood relatives' cheeks to try to cross-match with DNA found on the site. And we'll talk about that a little later. Before we get to the DNA, I want to introduce you to Mary Hart Wolfenberger and her nephew, Jed Hart. They're looking for Mary's brother, John Hart. Thank you for coming out here with us. I want to ask you, he was in the second tower, and after the first explosion managed to call his wife.
Yes, my brother was in the South Tower, and after the first plane hit, he did call his wife in California and told her that he was fine, they were evacuating, and that he would call her as soon as he was safe. We had reports that he did make it to the ground floor, but that he went back in to try to help other people. After the second plane hit, John did call his wife again on his cell phone and tell her that he was in trouble, and that cell phone did go dead, and that was the last we have heard from my brother. But we're working hard here and trying to give all the information we can to the authorities inside the Armory, trying to provide them with any information that might help John's family to bring John home. I wanted to encourage all of the folks who are down working in that terrible rubble where my brother is, and the folks who are going to be receiving the DNA samples that we gave today, that they're telling us those DNA samples are being sent to Albany, and there must be an army of lab workers up there who are going to be working with that, and we really want to encourage those folks and tell them how important it is to help us find my brother John and bring him home.
This is your brother's Christmas card right down here. Can you introduce us to his family?
Yes, this is my brother's family in California, in Danville, California. This is Emily, who is 5 years old, Weston, who is 7, Amy, who is a senior in high school, and Jeff, who is a sophomore at Kent State University in Ohio. And
they live in California. Tell me why he was here.
John is an employee of Franklin Templeton, the mutual fund company, and they have a subsidiary at the World Trade Center, Fiduciary Trust. My understanding is Fiduciary had more than 700 employees in the South Tower. John was here to teach a seminar on the day of the disaster, and all of the employees of Fiduciary who were in that seminar are missing.
Mary, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Mary went in and gave a swab today as John's sister. The swabs are best actually not from a sibling but from a parent or a child, and Mary was describing what sounds to me like a very sad scene. People yesterday weren't bringing their children in here because, of course, how could they help, but today they can. So children are inside having their cheeks swabbed so that they can help find their parents. They've set up a little playroom with toys for the children, but again, the children and the parents are the best people to swab. So people are bringing their children in, they're swabbing their cheeks so they can match the DNA up with their parents. Aaron?
Elizabeth, I don't believe we've talked much about this, but when you watch the workers behind us over at the Trade Center site, it is such a meticulous effort, and they are looking for, and this is gruesome, but any remains they can find, and that's where this DNA comes in. And the reason they do this is because people need this sense of, I hate this word, but closure, of completion. They need something that says their person, their friend, their husband, their wife, whatever, has come home in some way. It's very
Absolutely,
difficult.
absolutely. They need a sense. Actually, Mary told me, but I interviewed her off camera, and she said, "I am feeling pessimistic now. I have less hope, but I want him to come home one way or another."
Yeah. Elizabeth, thank you. We'll be checking in again. Down at, really, I think I saw the number 4,700 had been a good deal number of people have been checked into hospitals, and that actually goes on even now because it's dangerous down on the work site. People slip, fall, get hurt, get things in their eyes. Dr. Sanjay Gupta is down there for us. Doc, what is the scene?
Good afternoon, Aaron. That's exactly right. We don't have as many patients here as I think the doctors were expecting originally. In fact, there's only about 30 to 35 patients that are still in the hospital today, 4 days later from Tuesday. What we do see a lot more is, and you can see behind me, Aaron, is really striking, a sort of missing persons wall with many people gathered around it. You can see an American flag. A lot of folks are coming up here, putting up the signs of their loved one, the posters of their loved ones, and a lot of neighbors, friends, relatives are coming by to check those things out. As people in the leadership of this country are investigating who might have committed this tragedy, there are other sorts of investigations going on as well, a little bit more grisly, and that is the identifying of the bodies. And there are many different techniques. Elizabeth and you just sort of were talking about DNA. I spoke to a couple of the medical examiners that talked specifically about other techniques they might use. One thing they told me that was rather striking is that almost never do they use visualization alone, looking at a picture of a corpse. That is almost never the only way a body is verified. They look at x-rays, dental x-rays. They look at x-rays that the patient may have had beforehand. They look at all sorts of different skin markings, such as tattoos, and certainly DNA, any DNA off a razor, toothbrush, hairbrush, anything that can be brought in can be compared, and certainly the DNA of the parents is also the most useful. These are what the medical examiners are sort of dealing with now. It is a grisly task. About 92 bodies only have been identified as of yet, so they have a lot of work in front of them. Aaron.
I was just thinking as you were talking about when you said it's not as busy, thank goodness, as it was, maybe as the people expected, what it must have been like at St. Vincent, which is, I think, the closest big hospital, at least, to the Trade Center, what it must have been like there Tuesday at about noon as the flood of injured came in.
That's right. I talked to a lot of the doctors here, some of whom are my close friends, Aaron, and they said that they were expecting thousands of patients. They were on standby. They were calling people to have them ready to come in should the demand be there. And frankly, they were surprised. After that first wave of patients that they referred to as the walking wounded, people who had mainly abrasions, smoke inhalation, eye injuries, things like that, they weren't seeing a lot more patients. And that certainly was a sort of a harbinger that they did not want to see, Aaron.
I was going to say, I'm sure they would have liked to have been a lot more busy in that regard than it turned out. Doc, thanks for your work here. We appreciate it. Back to Atlanta for a bit, special edition of Talk Back Live, and Bobby Batista. Bobby?
Well, Aaron, the talk has been continuing while you've been bringing us up to date, and we will continue on here for another 35 minutes or so. By the way, we are taking viewer phone calls and email. As you know, as we understand it, we're being simulcast on several radio stations. So if you want to call, the number is 1-800-310-4CNN, or send us an email to talkback@cnn.com. As we continue, Congressman Jerry Nadler is still with us. Congressman Tom Reynolds had to leave. We understand understand. And James Zogby of the Arab American Institute is still with us. And yeah, well, go ahead, Congressman Nadler, and then I want to ask.
I just want to add one thing here that really people haven't focused on. People think of the World Trade Center area as a great commercial area, and it obviously is. But in the last 10 years, it has also become a residential area. 25,000 people live in that neighborhood below Chambers Street, and in the area in which, except for emergency vehicles, there's no transportation in and out. And my office and the office of the other elected officials have had to, I represent that area, have had to take the lead in dealing with some of the problems down there. For example, I'll mention two of them. A lot of the people in some of those buildings who were young and could move have left the area. They've taken their kids. They're living with relatives or wherever. The old people, the elderly people, haven't been able to. They're stuck in those buildings. The home attendants can't get in or get out. The drugstores can't deliver pharmaceuticals. The drugstores aren't functioning. They can't get their drugs, so we have to deal with that. In addition to which,
sounds to me then that there is a way to use a lot of those people who are trying to volunteer.
Well, there will be, but that has to be coordinated. But I want to say one other thing. There are at least 1,500 to 2,000 apartments that are uninhabitable at this point, right across from the World Trade Center. We're asking the governor and the mayor. I spoke to the White House this morning to make the housing facilities on Governor's Island available, at least on a temporary emergency basis, for some of the people who can't get to their buildings, they can't get to their apartments.
Bobby, I want to ask Mr. Zogby something because I know you have to leave here in just a few moments. We heard Aaron Brown talk about an incident earlier this morning at Boston's Logan Airport on a Delta flight that had to be stopped and deplaned and searched and bomb sniffed and everything else, and that a man was taken off that plane because he was vaguely Arab looking. I know that comment concerned you.
Hurts. I'm vaguely Arab looking, and my kids are too. I mean, maybe a little more than vaguely. The fact is, Bobby, that we've seen this all over the country, and this is one of the problems we're having is that, in fact, people are being targeted because they look Arab. And that includes Hispanics and some African Americans and Filipinos are being attacked and called Arabs. This cannot happen, and it should not happen. And one of the things I think your program does so well is bring this discussion to a wider public to say, don't let there be an assumption of collective guilt, because if you do, we're really falling into a very dangerous pit that will divide our country and make us weaker. Look, I've seen situations where, just the other night, I was doing your show, I think, one of the shows on this network, and they were reporting that a number of people were arrested at JFK and taken off the planes and handcuffed and so on and so forth. Justice Department told us the next day they were all freed, and it was bogus. But in the meantime, there was this fear that the Arabs are back at it again. This was a problem. 19 people did evil, and we need to find ways to protect ourselves, to ferret out this problem, but we cannot fall down the deep hole of racial prejudice, because if we do, it will be a nightmare for all of us at the end.
James Zogby, I know that you have to leave. Thanks very much for joining us today. I always appreciate your perspective on this. Eddie, you are an American. Yes. You have ties to Iran. Mm-hmm. You sort of feel like you have no country, is what you told me.
No, I'm very so delighted to be in this country for 30 years. I have learned so much. It's beyond my imagination.
You have some of the same obvious concerns that Mr. Zogby was talking about.
Yes. I have a comment, and then I have a question for the guests. The comment is that I have watched this suffering and pain that has happened through this tragic event in New York. To me, this suffering and pain is not American suffering. It's not Republican or Democrat. It's not Western suffering. It's a humanity suffering. So the suffering that has happening in the Palestinian families, can we feel the same way we feel today? The suffering is happening in the Israeli family. Can we feel the same way they feel today? This is a suffering of the humanity. So this is what the challenge is for all the leaders and every human being, that we have to go to our heart, and wherever the suffering is, it is our suffering. It is just one suffering. There is no division. So the division that is taking place in this world, which is the Western world, and then the free world, and not free world, and my question then is to these leaders that they are making this horrendous decision today, is that has been so much effort to bring the freedom to the Eastern Europe. Why there is no? Most of these terrorists came from the Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Arab Emirates, and all of these countries are the very good friend of United States. Why we don't bring democracy in these societies? So these kind of people do not fester in these societies.
And this is your question is for the congressman.
My question to the congressman, why we don't promote the democracy in the Arab world as we promote democracy in Eastern world, Eastern Europe?
Well, there are limits to the power of the United States. I think the United States has tried over the years to promote democracy. Certainly the United States Information Agency, the radio broadcasts and so forth. But especially during the Cold War, which ended only 10 years ago, the United States found itself in alliance with a lot of countries that weren't great democracies because we had to oppose the communist world, or felt we had to. Now, Egypt, for example, is supposedly a friend of the United States, and in some ways it is. On the other hand, the government-controlled press in Egypt foments the most vicious racism and anti-Semitism and even anti-American feelings. I think because that's a way for the government to appease the fundamentalist Islamic movements in that country. They feel that that's something they have to do politically. I'm not sure what the United States... I mean, should we have been? I think we should have been, and I think we should now put more pressure on countries like Egypt and the Palestinian Authority, for example, to stop promoting this kind of anti-Semitic and viciously racist propaganda. That's actually part of the Oslo Agreement the Palestinian Authority signed, which they never agreed to. But the United States is not in a position to impose democracy in other countries. We can put pressure to a degree. Now, certainly, I agree on a different level with what was being said before by Mr. Zogby. We have to make sure that in the United States itself, and where we can really affect things to a much greater degree, that we educate our own people that the evil people who did this are not representative of all Muslims or of all whoever, and certainly not of Arabs or Muslims who live in the United States, a small number of whom may sympathize with these people, but most of whom, the great majority of whom, do not. We do not want to see. We made a terrible mistake in World War II when we interned Americans of Japanese ancestry. We made another terrible mistake when foreign nationals from enemy countries who had fled those countries because they disagreed with the Nazi regime were suspected. So we have to be very careful about protecting civil liberties and civil rights of minority groups in our own country.
Let me do some emails and phone calls here. We're getting an awful lot of emails from Canada. We seem to have a lot of friends in Ontario. Sean says, as a nation of peacekeepers, Canadians stand behind our brothers and sisters in the United States in any action necessary to combat these heinous acts of terror. Colin in Ontario says, as a Canadian, I feel pain for America. As a father and a firefighter, I feel worse for the American people. If asked, I would be there in a heartbeat. Richard Diaz says, Puerto Rico is with you. As American citizens, we fought bravely in your wars. We will fight with you on this one as well. Count on us. God bless America. Let me go to Clinton on the phone in California. Clinton?
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm 63 years old, and if they called me today and they wanted me to go fight, I would go fight. And I'm thinking that I hear a lot of this talk, and even if they arrested Ben Laden, what good would that do? Because somebody's to take his place. They've got to go out to the nation or nations that did this act on American citizens. That's all I had to say about
All right. Clinton, thank you very much. This is an interesting email I've gotten from Gavin in Philadelphia, who says, I am friends with Pakistani engineers where I work. They have lived here for years. How can I not worry that they are part of a sleeper network of terrorist supporters? I wish James Zogby was still here, but Congressman...
That is one of the really insidious effects of this type of terrorism. There are sleeper agents, and one of the things that any enemy of the United States will try to do is to have us distrusting each other. You can't look at everybody of a generally Arabic appearance or everybody who came from Pakistan 20 years ago, or for that matter 20 months ago, and worry that he may be a sleeper. There are sleeper agents, but the odds that your friends or that the people living next door are sleepers are minuscule. There are millions of people in this country with Middle East, not just Middle East, but Southern Asian backgrounds. Maybe there are 20 or 30 sleeper agents, who knows, or 40 or 50. We cannot start looking at everybody else in the United States as an enemy. Leave that to the FBI and to our government investigative agencies to figure out who the sleepers are, who the enemy agents are. We don't want to get to a McCarthyite situation. We looked at anybody who was to the left of, who had liberal sympathies and said maybe he's a communist.
That is the downside of it, and it's already happening. Matthew, for example, was telling us earlier that your uncle, correct, in Florida? Oh, that was Mohammed, or Magdi. One of you was. Magdi, you were telling me your uncle had been a victim of this already. Matthew, well, go ahead, Magdi. You tell us about it first.
Well, his house was vandalized. Actually, on his garage and on his mailbox, the F word was put, and Muslims was put next to it. And then he got some phone calls telling him to get out of the neighborhood. I'm not sure whether people wanted to protect him or they were just telling him to get out. And there were also people run off the road in certain places. Someone had her hand broken at a university in Florida. I'm not going to say which one, but various acts have been perpetrated.
Heavens.
Let me add here, if I can. The president and Governor Pataki and Mayor Giuliani have been very good in speaking out against this kind of hate crime or a generalization. The essence of prejudice is to generalize and say because one Muslim or 50 Muslims did these terrible things, therefore all Muslims or all Jews or all Irish or all whoever are terrible, dangerous people. That's the essence of discrimination and prejudice. I think it's the duty of all elected officials to speak out and warn people against this kind of conduct, and it's the duty of our law enforcement agencies when they find it, because there will be some people who will do that. In any society, you get people who are going to disobey the law, and these are illegal acts. Hate crimes are illegal, and they should be punished.
I'm sure there may be some fear about reporting them, which there shouldn't be, but that sort of goes along with it. Matthew, you had a story about your friend?
It's not a story about a particular friend at all, but I will bring Jerry into it. But I think this country also needs to realize that the identity or the image that they have of what an American is kind of skewed. I'm an American. And that idea of, like, it's not just a white person or a black person. There's those of us in colors in between. Our names, they can be Saurabh, Jagjit, Omar. You know, our names come from, just like anybody else, our grandfathers, our forefathers before us. But we are Americans, and like I mentioned to you all before, if I was drafted, I would go to war because I am an American man. But like you had this person mention through the email about, you know, I'm afraid of these Pakistani co-workers. That's ridiculous to say such things, because we love our country just as much. I went to preschool here. I grew up, I'm just as American. This is my identity. And I'm proud of the skin color, and I'm proud of where my parents come from as well, and that's also my identity. But it hurts as an American to hear my fellow Americans say that they're afraid of me. I get second looks. You don't know where I'm from. But it's really bothersome, and I think I ask all of America to realize that we are in this together, and don't judge us by the way that we look. And I want to point to my friend Jerry. He's of the Sikh religion. They wear turbans on their head, and a lot of people have confused these folks. You see pictures of the folks from the Taliban. They also wear turbans. That's a regional thing. Jerry he's not Muslim. He's of a completely different religion, but there's been violence committed against people of his faith as well, because people are ignorant and don't understand. And Jerry's just like me. We grew up in America. We went to college together here. And I just think it's ridiculous to attack us because of the way we look. And honestly, this is an issue that African Americans faced in the 60s. We are not anything different. We're equals, and we're Americans.
Add something here.
Jerry, did you want to comment on this?
Yes.
Quickly?
I'd like to say that I am a Sikh American, and as part of our religious uniform, we're required to wear turbans and keep our head covered. And a lot of people do mistake us for these terrorists because, as you see on the media, when you see the pictures of Osama bin Laden, you see him wearing a turban and keeping his head covered and so forth. I have spoken to many of my friends across this country, and they've told me of stories of people, Sikhs, and Arabs and Muslims being chased, being beaten. And we're not the targets. We're all in this together. We need to find these select few people who are committing these attacks against humanity and go after them.
And one more phone call on this. Sandy in Alabama. Sandy, go ahead.
I am an American citizen. I am also a Muslim woman, and I cannot hide the fact that I am a Muslim. I fear for my life for just stepping out the door. Since this thing happened, I have been in my home, and I was wondering how, and as this escalates, how am I supposed to feel safe? When is it going to be safe for me to go out of my home, and when is it going to be safe for my children to go back to school?
All right, Sandy, thank you. Hezbon, you're from Kenya.
Yeah, I'm from Kenya, and as everybody knows, like 2 years ago, we had just a problem like this. We had a bombing in Nairobi, which the U.S. embassy was bombed, and as Kenya, we lost a lot of people. And I share the feeling with the Americans, and I know the way they feel because it happened to us, 2 years ago. But I'm asking myself, when this thing happened in Kenya and it happened right now here in the United States, and I'm asking myself that why is it happening? I'm asking myself again and again, why? And why do these people really hate? There must be something for it. Why do you really hate, and why are you doing these kind of things? And I'm asking myself again and again, and I can't get any answer at all. So that's only my comment.
Let me comment on that if I could.
Mm-hmm.
There doesn't always have to be a rational reason. When you look throughout history at why minority groups were hated, why were the Jews hated in Germany or in other countries, it was not because of anything they did. If they were successful in businesses, that was a cause of discrimination. If they weren't successful, that was a cause of discrimination. It didn't matter. They were called communists and capitalists, both. The fact is that the United States is the dominant country in the world today. It represents freedom, it represents democracy, it represents modernity, and there are groups who feel threatened by all of those, by modern society, by democracy, by freedom, and they hate us for that reason, for who we are and what we are, not because of anything we're doing. As I said earlier in the program, it is striking that these terrorists, Osama, whoever did this, the people who've done other terrorist acts in the past, they didn't ask us, they didn't demand anything of us. They didn't say, change your policy on this, change your policy on that. They just bombed us, because their opposition to us is not based on a specific policy. It's not based because of the Middle East crisis or anything else. It's because of who and what we are, and there's nothing we can do in all likelihood to change that. And we simply have to defeat them and take away their ability to harm us, because they're going to exercise that just because of who and what we are. And if it seems not rational, it isn't.
An email from Lacey at Cannon Air Force Base in New Mexico says, if we don't fight to keep our freedom, we will eventually lose it to those responsible for these attacks on America. My husband is currently in Saudi Arabia, and I fear I will never see him again. But if I don't, I will know that he fought for me, for you, and for America's freedom. Christina.
Yes, I'd like to hear our leaders' thoughts on long-term changes we can make in the U.S. role overseas. I think it's time for us as citizens to educate ourselves about our country's history in developing countries, and for our leaders to really question themselves and ask, is it still necessary for us to have places like the School of the Americas in Fort Benning, Georgia, where we train military leaders that then turn around and abuse and oppress their own citizens? Is it still necessary for us to put dictators in power and support those corrupt governments? And that's what we've done over and over in various countries. I think too often we've been looking at short-term problems, and we're not looking at what's truly right for a democratic country to be supporting, and we're creating resentment overseas. I'd like to hear our leaders' thoughts on how we can change that.
Well, I don't know who. I'm one of the leaders, I suppose, and I can only give you my own views, which are my own. I agree with you on the School of the Americas. I have voted repeatedly to eliminate the School of the Americas because of the abuses of what it has done. I think that most of the abuses of putting dictators into power are historical at this point. They were done in the context of the Cold War, in the perceived necessity of defeating the communist enemy. I don't think we're doing that right now. I think that the war on drugs, however, is leading us into some of the same mistakes in places in Latin America that the war on communism led us into in Europe and Asia and Latin America, and that's a whole different subject. We ought to promote, to the extent we can, democracy abroad, but we shouldn't attempt to impose it on people. There are people in this world, countries with vastly different cultural traditions of the United States, and you can't impose different traditions, different ways of life on them. It's not our business to do so. We should promote democracy to the extent we can, but that's it. Let people live the way they want to. We should certainly not be promoting or supporting dictatorships, and I think that that's much less of a problem now than it was, say, 10 years ago. And that is our promoting such things.
Annette's on the phone. Go ahead, Annette.
Hi. Well, I basically want to be very brief in saying that I think we're suffering from political correctness. I think that I would be glad to give up some of my civil liberties at this point to be taken off a plane, make sure the plane is safe. I don't condone anything that's been done as far as terrorizing people that live here. But, you know, if you were to ask the people that died, would they have given up a little bit of their civil liberties so that wouldn't happen? I'm sure every one of them would have said they would. I don't think it's out of anybody's way, whether you are Arabic or Hispanic, to be taken off a plane. I would do it gladly, and people should stop whining, is basically what they're doing. And stop being an individual, because right now you're not. You're just one United States.
Congressman, are you anticipating a fight over that necessarily, or do you feel like most Americans do feel that way
I think that the caller is mixing up two things. Safety on airplanes is not a civil liberties issue. We have to be very careful not to sacrifice our civil liberties. There will be calls, I'm sure, to sacrifice our civil liberties, to sacrifice due process of law, as there were during the fight against communism. And that we have to be very careful about and not surrender to. Safety on airplanes, going through more rigorous screening to get on an airplane and so forth, by all means, that's not a civil liberties question. But we should not, if we allow our society in the name of fighting terrorism or in the name 10 years ago of fighting communism to surrender our civil liberties, we are giving a great victory to the enemies of liberty. And after all, why this country is founded on liberty, it's to promote liberty, and that's one of our great aspirations and reasons for being. And we should not permit those unspeakable people who don't believe in liberty to cause us to give up some of it.
Teal in the audience.
I'd just like to make a point to all the Americans that feel they need to discriminate against, like, my fellow Americans over here and all the people of different ethnicities in our country that are Americans. I want to say that the people that have been lost in those two towers were not just white people with blonde hair and blue eyes. They were of all different nations. They were people just like you and me with different colored skin. And they were lost too. They feel the pain. And I just want to say that those people that feel they need to discriminate them need to stop, because they're hurt just as much as we are, and that's not the solution.
A couple of more emails here. Milton in Los Angeles says we need a meaningful dialogue to try to understand why people would resort to such terrible actions. Retaliation does not feel like the proper answer. Christine in Illinois, my husband is in the Army Reserves and I support him in our country. The people that did this crime must pay. United we stand. God bless the USA. Let me go up to the audience here quickly.
Zarika, go ahead.
Okay. I would like to question my concern basically to the general. Is it fair for them to point their finger to Bin Laden not really knowing if he did it, because it's causing all these emotions? And people like my sister, she lives in Baltimore. She's in a Muslim Arab school, and they have been people have been harassing them, media has put a lot of attention on them, and no one really knows. They don't have any hard evidence on to who has done it. So now
Well, let's clarify that, because I think that we must, Congressman, since the president came out and named Osama bin Laden as the prime suspect today.
Well, I'm not in law enforcement, but I am told they have very hard evidence as to who did it, and I think we have to face reality. And the reality is there are a group of related terrorist groups out there, most of whom espouse a certain extremist brand of Muslim fundamentalism. They are not representative of 98% or 99% of Muslims in the world. And we have to fight the people who have declared war on us, but we also have to make clear that the people who are Muslims or Arabs, but who are not part of these terrorist groups, are our friends. They are our fellow citizens, and they're not to be equated just because they share the same skin color or the same cultural background or not even the same religion, because this fundamentalist brand of Islam is not the same as most Muslims who believe in peace. So you have to educate people that they're not the same, but at the same time, you can't turn you can't ignore the facts of who the enemy is. A small group of people, but we have a pretty good idea who they are, and we have to make sure that we concentrate on them and differentiate them from all the Muslims and the Arabs and other people who are not them. And that's what we have to educate our people on.
Magdi Mohammed want to respond?
I just have a quick question for the congressman. You said that the terrorists made no specific demands, yet if I recall correctly from my Gulf War history, Osama bin Laden, assuming he is the perpetrator, said that the reason he's mad at us is because we have American troops in Saudi Arabia, which he considers Islamic Holy Land. Could you just comment on that briefly?
Well, he can say what he wants, and I don't. But the fact, well, first of all, it's 10 years ago if he said that. But they made no demands on us in the last 10 years that I know of, or recently. I'm sure they have grievances. But the point is, they didn't say, remove your troops from Saudi Arabia, or do this, or do that, or else we will. They simply attacked us and over a period of time. Now, the United States has interests in various places in the world. We have interests in helping out friends. Yeah, if the United States were totally isolationist and did nothing abroad, maybe they wouldn't oppose us. Maybe. But on the other hand, we have the right to do what we democratically decide to do, as long as it doesn't infringe on others. Now, we don't have a lot of troops in Saudi Arabia. I don't know how many we have there now, but they're there. If we have, I'm not even sure we have any troops in Saudi Arabia, but if we do, they're there at the invitation of the Saudi government for whatever purpose. And for some terrorist to come along and say he has decided that he's going to attack the United States because he doesn't like what we're doing in connection with Saudi Arabia, well, if he decides to attack us, that makes him our enemy.
Mohammed?
Previously, Congressman, you brought up the issue of the billions of dollars spent on intelligence and spy satellites. But if spy satellites can pinpoint any license plate number of car from anywhere around the world, why can't those spy satellites locate the whereabouts of Osama bin Laden?
Well, I'm not a technical military expert, but the fact is, our satellites can photograph things on the ground. As you say, they can spot a license plate number. They can intercept electronic communications. But if you don't travel with license plates, if you travel with a hood over your head and don't, period, if you don't use electronic communications, you communicate in writing, very difficult. We clearly need more human intelligence.
Let me go up to the newsroom here quickly to Miles O'Brien. I think Miles is standing by there, and he's been keeping track of aviation around the country and, of course, the changes that have been made in aviation security. We have a number of people in the audience, by the way, who are afraid to fly right now and who have changed their plans. And we'll talk to them in a few moments. But give us an overview, if you will, Miles, of what's going on in the country right now.
Well, Bobby, I don't know if you can see this very well with the glare. Maybe we can get a close-up. But this is basically a nearly real-time image of what the aviation picture in the country looks like right about now. And what it is showing you is a very, very crowded sky. Look at all these aircraft. There are more than 4,000 aircraft over the United States already. The system is pretty much back to where it would be on a normal day. And I guess what that tells you is things can get back to normal kind of quickly. Of course, normalcy is a relative thing. We also don't know how many people are on board all these planes. Take a look at just the Northeast, if you will. You get a sense. Every one of those blue dots indicates one plane that is in flight. Not all commercial aircraft, but many of them commercial, some of them chartered, some of them general aviation with instrument ratings. I think that the concerns are real. I think some of the security issues have to be addressed, and I'm not sure that the FAA has addressed them all with these emergency restrictions.
A couple of folks in the audience with concerns or questions. Go ahead, Christy.
I mean, I live in Germany and I have to go back tomorrow. But I really think, I mean, there's no other way, but I have to fly. But I don't think that I'm going to come back for a while because of that reason. And I'm going to wait till the security standard in America is the same as in Europe, so that I feel comfortable flying again.
You also had a question for the General, and as I understand it, he has joined Miles now. General Wesley Clark is up there, former NATO commander. I'll take your question in just a second for the General on that, but let me have you put some strategic perspective, General, if you will, on the news that we got in the past hour or two that Iran has now closed its border with Afghanistan.
Well, I think it's a domestic issue for Iran, really. They don't want any more refugees in there. I wouldn't view it as either support or rejection of the United States, particularly. I think it's just something they're trying to do to protect themselves.
I know you're standing in front of the map there. If you could give us a little bit of an overview of that area and talk about it in terms of military strategy, if and when it comes to that.
Well, if it comes to military operations in this area, of course, what you have is the country of Afghanistan, which is landlocked. And this is ruled by the Taliban movement, except for a small portion of it, which is still where they're still fighting. And the thinking is that the Taliban may be supporting Osama bin Laden. And we don't know precisely where he might be in this area. But it is a landlocked area. It's several hundred miles from access from the sea. It's difficult terrain. There's 26 million people there. They've been through 22 years of civil war. They're impoverished. They've always been fractious, split into tribal groups, resistant to outside presence, and that's even more the case today. So it's a very tough part of the world.
A question from Christian in the audience.
General, do you think that there are going to be any European countries be involved in any military strikes or operations?
Well, I don't know about the military strikes because, you know, obviously that would be done if and when it makes sense, if there's a target, if it's best done. But, you know, this is an operation that's directed against a terrorist network. We're talking not about airfields and bunkers and factories. We're talking about groups of individuals who have perpetrated a terrible act on the United States, several acts on the United States, and are a threat to the rest of the world. So we're talking about something that's best dealt with on a face-to-face basis. We'd like European nations and Arab nations and Asian nations and everywhere around the world the cooperation from the local police, the national police, the information agencies. We need to really run these cells out of business wherever they are, in South America, in Europe, in Asia, person by person. Detain the people, interrogate them, investigate them, backtrack the information, find out who else is out there, and take this network apart and run it back to its source. And ideally, we'd like to bring these people into justice, put them on trial for this terrible act of murder, and let justice take its course.
Question from Cameron here, and this may be your last one, but we'll see. Go ahead, Cameron.
I have two things to say. The first one is a comment towards the congressman. My sister is one of the people who is not able to get back into her apartment. She lives 2 buildings away from the Trade Center. She watched the entire thing happen from her bedroom window. And you said earlier that you were going to try and set up housing for those people, and I beg you to please do that because she is homeless. She is a refugee right now. She has nowhere to go. She only has the clothes on her back. So,
well, as I said, I put in a call to the White House this morning, and we're going to be talking to the governor and the mayor in the next day about trying to see if it makes sense to open up Governor's Island and to see how long it'll take to get that available. They have to, you know, the facilities there are mothballed, to see how long it'll take to unmothball and to get the ferry service running there. And if that's a matter of a couple of days or a couple of weeks, if it's a couple of days, maybe we can do that. If it's a few weeks, we need something else, obviously.
All right.
But we're working on this now.
All right, thank you. And the second thing I have to say is for the general. It's a question. What way do you think it would be most effective to go into Afghanistan, considering they're not a pushover country, as was illustrated when the Soviet Union invaded them and lost over 100,000 men? Ground war won't work, of course. And I mean, I think we're technologically advanced to really keep the body count low. I mean, I'm just asking, how are we going to do this? What's the best way?
We got about 15 seconds
I know
for that, General.
There are many different ways. The best way is for the Taliban to arrest Osama bin Laden and turn him over to the world community for for justice.
General Clark, thank you very much. Miles, thank you. And Congressman Nadler, we appreciate you being with us for the last couple of hours. Our audience, I thank you all very much for being here today. Wonderful comments, insightful questions. And we will be here again tomorrow at a slightly different time from 3 to 5 p.m. tomorrow afternoon, another special edition of Talkback Live. And we hope that you will join us then as America Speaks Out. We will be going to Aaron Brown now in New York for the latest on what's going on. Thank you for joining us.